Happy New Year, everyone, and welcome to the first oneliner.com podcast of 2013. We will be talking today about Life of Pi, The Hobbit, An Unexpected Journey, The Impossible, and also we'll be starting our new feature of looking back at films now available on Catch Up. I am Craig Eastman, as always, several miles north of me, Scott Morris.
Hello.
And several miles north by northeast of me, Drew Tavendale.
Hello.
Well, lads, happy 2013 to you.
And to you, sir, and to all of our listeners.
Yes,
Merry number
all
change
of
at the
us.
end of the date.
Yes. See how the last number's gone up one? Clever, eh? It's that time of the year where award season is in full swing. Quite a few awards contenders out there at the cinema. It's always a good time to catch up with something. It's that time of year where I think I said it before many times, where if you throw a stone inside a multiplex, you're far more likely to hit a good film at this time of year than probably any other time of the year.
But if you're really lucky, you throw a stone inside the multiplex, you hit some idiot talking through the film.
Yes.
This tends to be why I throw stones in multiplexes, but
You could aim the stone at the guy who has his iPhone out tweeting during the film. Oh wait, that's me. No, that's a joke. I would never do that. Hate it. So I guess, first of all, let's start at the start. Arguably the biggest film doing the rounds at the moment in terms of box office is The Hobbit, available in a frankly fucking stupid number of formats for you to watch. Drew, what format did you see The Hobbit in today?
it was a picture format.
Excellent.
I've had the paper one before, but this one's had pictures.
Was it?
Is that not what you mean, no?
We've established it wasn't the high frame rate version you saw, but was it the 3 of the D or the 2 of the D?
It was the one that did require me to wear stupid bits of plastic on my face for 3 hours, yes.
Yay! Stupid plastic.
Made of the world's most easily scratchable material.
Excellent. What did you make of The Hobbit, Drew? Tell us a little bit about it.
I can't believe there's anybody listening who wouldn't know what The Hobbit was, but just in case such a person exists, it is the children's book that J.R.R. Tolkien wrote about 12 years before The Lord of the Rings was released. It's set in the same world and features a story of Bilbo Baggins joining a group of dwarves and Gandalf as they travel to the Lonely Mountain to get a bunch of gold and their city out of the hands of a big nasty dragon. Boo, hiss, etc.
Oh, he hates that dragon.
And the important point to note is that The Lord of the Rings, in total being well over 1,000 pages of quite dense text because it was a book more for adults, and The Hobbit being a book of 300 pages of considerably larger text, so it's appropriate that The Hobbit has been split into 3 nearly 3-hour films. Yeah, I don't get that one, because it turns out when you watch it, The Hobbit has more padding than an ice hockey goalie.
Commercial concerns aside, because obviously Peter Jackson has stated that it absolutely was not for commercial reasons that a 2-film project became a 3-film project, and we'll just accept that.
Well, see, I could possibly accept that it's not commercial, but if it's not commercial, then it's hugely self-indulgent. It's certainly not for artistic reasons.
Yeah, the first thing I'd heard when it went to, I'm sure it went from 1 to 2, and at that point the excuse was that having had to cut so much stuff out of Lord of the Rings, he wanted to do something that was, a complete telling of the book.
Yeah.
And I can understand that. That kind of makes sense to me.
You can read the book in less than 5 hours, I guess, probably, but if you at a leisurely pace, you can imagine it taking you 5 hours to read that book. Right.
Yeah, and I can imagine after all the heartache that he must have went through with Lord of the Rings trying to butcher those down in 3 hours. I can see why he would have wanted to do that. But when it went to 3, like most sane people, taking issue with that because you require big swinging brass balls to say, right, well, what is the most beloved children's story of all time? I'm just going to add bits of that in because I think it makes sense and works better in my little universe. Like, that's kind of less commendable, and it really shows because all the bits that are easily the weakest are the bits that have just been patched in.
Absolutely,
from his, and it sticks out like a sore thumb.
Because if you look at the Lord of the Rings films, if you've ever watched any of the extras, they keep on coming back to this thing that every time they tried writing away from what was in the book, they ended up that the best thing they could come up with was much closer or was exactly the same as the book. And even when they sort of changed stuff about a wee bit, they still tried to use Tolkien's dialogue. And as Scott says, the bits that in Hobbit that stand out glaringly has been different from the rest of the stuff that has been added in.
Didn't he draw in... I haven't seen the film, obviously. That's why I take part in this podcast, because I see such a wide breadth of films at the cinema these days. I understand that they've warped in sort of huge sections of the Silmarillion and stuff like that to pad it out.
Yeah, but even then, it's not just that. I mean, that at least would be still trying to use some of Tolkien's work, but they've added in huge bits they've written themselves, and it's not a good plan because have you seen rewind Peter Jackson's other stuff, it's not good. And if anybody, heaven forfend, remembers King Kong, or the terrible Meet the Feebles, it's not actually that good. I feel like he's found the one thing he did really well was The Lord of the Rings.
No, if they patched in bits of bad taste, I would definitely go and see it. If all of a sudden one of the dwarves picked up a bazooka, shot at an alien mist and blew up a sheep instead,
Yeah.
I would be down with that.
There's a scene where they've decided to add in Galadriel and for some reason Saruman into the film.
Right.
And then mix it in with stuff from, it's sort of like the backstory that's in the Silmarillion about the Witch King of Angmar, etc. They've added this in as a really bizarre plot point to justify why Gandalf's going on this trip at all. Then you just have, it's this really awkward bit where they basically have a wee bickering match around a table where Saruman gets given the clunkiest of dialogue saying, "Oh, yeah, I don't believe this is evil because I'm going to be bad later and I've got to explain how somehow."
Well,
Look over there, quick.
To be honest, of all the bits that was hiding, that I found the least offensive, at least that it had some clunky dialogue aside, was some sense for it to happen. But the bit that's really annoying is the addition of a vapid, transparent Darth Maul-esque character for Thorin to have as a nemesis, Azog the Defiler, I believe, who's a kind of big bad mean orc who killed Thorin's father and grandfather, I think, and
she's based on the idea there was like a goblin, it may even be the same name, I can't remember for certain. There was a goblin king when they get taken by the goblins in the cave, who's a bit more like him, I think, rather than the one that's in the film. But yeah, it's the whole people trying to get this strange thing, trying to get revenge on other people and chasing them.
It didn't
that
work
was
because
egregious.
it was just so, because it was so transparent that the only reason that's there is because otherwise you can't write this into a 3-film structure and have some kind of conclusion that makes sense without having some other protagonist. Because for a book that's about a bunch of dwarfs going to kill a dragon, there's very little dragon action in this film.
Yeah. Well, at this rate, I'm guessing Smaug's not going to get a look until about halfway through the third film.
I mean, yeah, I don't think he's meant to appear till the third film beyond what you see in this film, which is an eye.
Yeah, there's possibly a bit of raising going on in the Longtown or whatever the thing is might show up in it, but even then that might be towards the end of that film.
But remind me, Scott, it's a while since I read The Hobbit. I've never been particularly enamoured of it, although while I love the Lord of the Rings books, but like a stupid CGI action set piece which was added in because apparently the film wasn't quite long enough yet, where there's these huge rock giants hitting each other. Was that the whole idea of rock giants not just a metaphor for the storm in the book? I don't remember there actually being rock giants, but so I can't remember for certain. Well,
possibly, come to think of it, it might not be dwelled on. I've not read it in a while myself, but it was one of the books that I really loved growing up. It's the first book that I can remember reading that wasn't like, Spot or something like that.
Yeah, it's the first book I ever read in one sitting, and I remember feeling entirely chuffed at myself for it.
I liked a lot of it, to be honest with you. Perhaps because of this sort of nostalgia that's there. There is one thing arguably it does better than Lord of the Rings. It does maintain a kind of consistent, kind of light-hearted tone throughout the thing. It's obviously, this is basically trying to be a children's film as well as from a children's book, whereas Lord of the Rings was a little bit somewhat haphazard in some of its tone. I mean, it would go from like in the same scene of having things like Sam fighting off orcs with a frying pan and then immediately going, oh, I need to emote because Frodo's dead in this scene, although he isn't. But it does manage to kind of maintain tone quite well. And for an amazingly long film, which it unarguably is, I really didn't feel that much time had passed. I was actually quite surprised when the credits rolled, not just because obviously there'd been no dragons, but it just didn't feel like a particularly long film. There's a lot of things that I can pick holes in and say that this is obviously not functioning properly because of this, that and the other, but on the other hand, I did enjoy it.
See, I didn't, and you said about nostalgia, Scott. I never read Hobbit as a kid. I read it as an adult, and I actually read it after I read The Lord of the Rings.
There's your problem.
Yeah.
That's just part of the problem, I imagine, so it wasn't like I completely disliked the film, but I did notice the time pass over. It wasn't like Avatar or anything. Let's not say it's that bad, and it certainly didn't feel like it dragged like that film did.
Yeah.
But what I was just so conscious of was the padding. It's so unnecessary.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And you could probably have powered a turbine with the rate my eyes were swivelling and rolling up in my head just every time something extra got added in.
If anything, they've missed a trick in this argument and splitting it into 3 films. If you'd kept it to 2 hours, which by the sounds of it, he could quite easily have done, everyone would have been a winner. I wouldn't be quite so indignant about it as I am, because I've no intention of ever watching it. On principle, if you decide that the greatest thing you can do is, or sorry, the best thing for this film is to take on authorship of Tolkien's own work and right to your own stuff to include in it, then you're on a hiding to nothing where I come from. Leave it well alone. This argument of the multiplex is always having to sort of like, we need to pack as many screenings in a day as we can. If you decide to say, okay, look, we're going to make it 3 films, but they're going to be 2 hours long, no one's going to feel aggrieved by a 2 hour. 2 hours is an acceptable running time for almost any film. You would have got, the multiplexes would have been happy. I would imagine probably the overall quality of the film, I can't speak on that because I haven't seen it, but it's probably likely to be better because you wouldn't have this padding issue that you guys are talking about. It's just the strangest decision that he felt the need to, and regardless of what he argues, it's blatantly obvious that it's for commercial reasons that it's been divided into 3 films, to then expand those 3 films as much as possible, as if to almost say, but look, here's the justification for splitting them. There's just so much material in the book, but there isn't. Why bother authoring all that extra stuff? Just put out 3 2-hour films.
Or just 2 films would have done.
Oh yeah, but what I'm saying is if you take on board, obviously, what we can assume to be the commercial requirements of the studio before they would fund it, and no, Peter, this will be 3 films. That's fine. I probably still wouldn't be enamored to see it, but I'd have a lot more respect if they were of a reasonable running time. Yeah. Don't try and pull the wool over my eyes by saying, oh, look, it was necessary to make them this length, when the book is so slender that you've essentially had to write 75% extra material yourself to pad the films out.
Can I speak to the point you just made and also partially correct myself to what I mentioned about the stone giants? It is actually in the book and probably still could be taken as a metaphor. That was a good 10 minutes in the film, I think. It's a huge CGI set piece, right?
Yes,
but this is it in the book.
This is about to highlight why I don't remember it. Is it a paragraph?
Yes.
It's a sentence. Bilbo's in a cave, right? When he peeped out in the lightning flashes, he saw that across the valley the stone giants were out and were hurling rocks at one another for a game and catching them and tossing them down into the darkness where they smashed among the trees far below or splintered into little bits with a bang. Then it talks about the wind. That was 10 minutes in the film. There's a sentence in the book.
There's a few bits like that. I mean, my recollection from the book is that Radagast the Brown is mentioned in maybe 1 sentence, and I didn't get much of a feel for the character from that, but it definitely wasn't a manic ex-Doctor Who goofball riding a rabbit-drawn sledge.
That's unlike any other character in the rest of the film at all. I'm not sure if he's in The Hobbit at all. He's mentioned once in The Lord of the Rings in the Fellowship when Gandalf gets trapped by Saruman. I think he's talking about him then.
Yeah.
About how he'd heard from Radagast listen to the birds and stuff.
Yeah, that's the one, yeah.
That's about the only mention I can remember of him. Yeah, and it's just such a goofy, almost like kind of cartoonish character that doesn't fit with anything else in the film at all.
I'm just thinking, Drew, that perhaps Peter Jackson's privy to some sort of technical aspect of the book that we're not. You know, can you see that sentence that you just read about the stone giants?
Yes.
Does it end with a full stop or a full stop zip?
Is it maybe like in Red Dwarf?
Has he unarchived that sentence? Yeah.
It's a microdot.
It's a microdot hidden in it which tells you all the rest.
Yes.
It's like Rimmer's swimming certificate. Other wee additions too, it's in the Radagast thing. It just seemed really ill thought out. It's like somebody's had this idea, it's 2 o'clock in the morning when they're really tired, and because Peter Jackson's got a lot of power in us to put in, because for some reason it's really important that we spend a few minutes with a CGI hedgehog called Sebastian.
Listen, we've wasted enough time talking about this already. Are there any merits to it?
The bits I really did like is mainly the performances from some of the characters, because you've got a pretty talented cast for the most part, and obviously some of these guys are coming back in reprising roles. So there's a brief reprise of Ian Holmes' Bilbo, which I've always liked as a kind of small, by-the-way character. But Tim from The Office does a really good job of Bilbo. I thought Bilbo's a pretty engaging character, and it really does help, or at least helped me buy the rest of the film. The bits that I weren't quite so enamored with, Tim from The Office does very well. I know his name's Martin Freeman, but I'm always ever going to call him Tim from The Office. And of course, Ian McKellen's just sort of slipping back into an old role, and it does kind of feel like an old glove by this point, I'd imagine.
I did really like the dwarves, actually.
The dwarves are good, and of course, I mean, it's not quite worth the price of admission alone, but the Andy Serkis' Gollum appearing.
It's always good value, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's a brilliant scene. And
yeah, I so agree with you, Scott. The performances from the cast are pretty uniformly excellent. Well, very, very good at least.
And can I just say, I really liked Richard Armitage as Thorin, because he's got quite a tough job of being kind of slightly pompous, stuck-up ex-prince at the same time as going to be, proud and a good warrior and a shepherd for his people and all that kind of thing. And he somehow manages to pull it off quite well, despite the fact that, puzzlingly, given the length of the film, he's not given enough screen time to actually do it in. So that worked very well.
I was just going to say, it's the one problem I do. I really enjoyed the dwarves. I thought Ken Stott was particularly engaging as Dwalin,
Yes.
one of the two, I think his name.
Yeah, he'd be Balin, I think.
He's very engaging. The only real problem with that is the fact that there were 12 dwarfs, so I don't think Bomber even speaks at any point. You've just got a problem.
Yeah.
You've got so many other characters, and you've got 12 dwarfs.
Bomber Harris.
Yeah. You can only really concentrate on one or two of them.
That's the vodka talking.
I suppose technical aspects, 3D, not impressed. It's not.
No,
it's
nor
not.
was I.
It's not bad 3D. I mean,
It's pointless 3D.
well, yes, it's not doing anything that kind of really shows off the 3D effect, which actually means that it's doing it properly by not just like randomly throwing things out of the screen at you. But it might as well not be there in that case. And this is the failing of 3D. All 3D films is that it just doesn't actually provide any real depth that looks anything like reality. So it actually hinders immersion rather than help it. So I think it's about time to call an end to the 3D experiment.
The only reason that I'm even vaguely interested in the film is the high frame rate issue, and the only sort of technical... I don't buy the sort of justifications being bandied about, because I've never had a problem with 24 frames a second, to be honest, but the only justification I can think of for the HFR version, and the reason why that would be the only version I would consider seeing, is that it makes sense from the point of view of a 3D presentation. And I was sitting thinking about this the other day, and I'm surprised no one's discussed it really, is that in watching a 3D presentation, whether it be passive or active, essentially, you're getting 24 frames a second, but each eye is only getting 12. So the HFR in doubling the frame rate basically restores a full, in a 3D presentation, restores a full 24 frames a second to each eye. Now that's of technical interest to me, but without watching it, I have no idea whether that's even relevant or not, or whether my assumption is entirely incorrect. But that is cause for interest. I'd like to see an HFR presentation of something else to make my mind up about it, just not this film in particular, because I'm so annoyed about the other issues surrounding it. So
you're also wrong, Craig, because 24 frames per second in a cinema is 24 frames per eye.
In 3D?
Because they project both images at the same time. That's why it looks blurry until you put the polarized glasses on.
Okay, sorry. I thought it was just
I think active shutter stuff on a television.
Active shutter must be.
Active shutter on a television is it's like alternate. But the reason they look blurry in a cinema is why you need glasses, because you're just getting both at the same time.
Passive polarization, okay, so it's still 24 frames a second, right? Okay, per eye. Okay, that cancels that then.
The point of the high frame rate would be it's 48 frames per second per eye, because it's supposed to reduce the flickering and
I know that. But what I'm saying is that based on my assumption of the 3D issue, but then that's incorrect in that case. Then that only applies to active. So
what I will say is I did go and see a 48 frames per second one, and I thought it looked brilliant. Now I know the one pushback I've seen from pretty much everyone with the higher frame rate is people going, "Oh, it looks like television," and well, maybe it does if your television's 30 foot across. But I was quite, I was quite able to distinguish the two, and what I thought this did, it gave the action scenes a really lovely, fluid look. Did actually help an awful lot. This is a far better aid to immersion than 3D ever was. Yeah, and I'm not quite sure why it looks better. The only thing I can imagine, like, even on just static screens, I can only imagine that it's something to do with like the digital encoding or something of it. When if you've got only 24 frames per second, any small movements kind of will produce a slight bit of blur. Where if you've got you're not doubling the resolution, but it may have something to do with that effect. It does look crisper and sharper and nicer. It really does look a hell of a lot better.
It's because it's removing judder, but then at the same point,
I was going to say the same applies to film as digital. I don't think it's an issue of like film versus digital. It is literally just the frame rate, regardless of how it's presented.
Well, see, that's why I was a bit concerned about it, because TV has one of those modes that removes the judder.
And I imagine the difference is obviously it's interpolating from things that aren't there.
Yeah.
Whereas this is obviously recording it in the proper one on the start.
That's one of the two problems. The other is that I can't abide it because it looks like video to me, and I hate it. I passionately hate the way it looks because it doesn't look like film anymore. It's that soap opera effect of things that's known in America, because it never wasn't quite the same name here. But I don't know if that's because I actually prefer film, or it's because I know that's what film looks like, and that looks like video, and I know video's cheaper.
That's why film looks like film and TV looks like TV. Yeah,
I mean, it does seem like the argument might wind up being something like the CD versus vinyl kind of arguments that have been kicking around since CD came about. I'm not willing to give a complete judgment on a sample of one.
Yeah.
But for a lot of films, things like most action films, I'd imagine a kung fu film, and this would look fabulous. I think this could well be the way of the future, depending on how much it actually costs to record it. It does seem like it's given a pretty significant advantage. And
no, I think the problem probably won't be recording it, because if it's all shot digitally, it shouldn't cost anything more. We need to buy new cameras. The issue will be projecting it, and how much it costs for the cinemas to actually put 48 frames per second projectors in.
I suppose, but I'm sure we were saying the same things when everything moved to all digital, and the same thing when it all went to 3D. So I'm sure Cineworld will have no doubt just tack an extra couple of quid onto your ticket and saying, "Oh, because it's in 48 frames per second." But
I just have to pay for those extra frames, you know.
Yeah,
light costs money.
Yeah,
and there's the transport costs, all those extra frames.
All the wee goblins got to lift them through the air to the screen and paint them on.
Well, you know, they went over their fair usage policy with their ISP when they downloaded the file to the cinema, so they've had to up the cost to pay off BT. You use more than 3 gigabytes. Nah.
Technical issues. I'm not sold on it completely, because, like I say, it's only the first time I've seen it, but I think that it does seem like it's pretty promising. I did enjoy this far more than any 3D film that I've seen.
Yeah.
Well, of course it wasn't 3D, but you know what I mean.
I was going to say.
I think it's a cinematic technique that has legs rather than a dead end.
I want to go and see an HFR 2D print to make my mind up. I'm not interested in seeing a 3D one.
Yeah, I'm sure you could have found one. It would probably have been my preference, but
no, I'm pretty sure the HFR version's only in 3D.
Because I think that's why they made it.
Yeah,
right.
I want to see HFR, but just in a 2D print. To make my mind up.
I think that would be ideal.
I don't buy the soap opera effect thing at all. I don't believe that at all. I think that's just a cheap analogy, because it's the first thing people can think of to describe it. I'm pretty sure I'll have a different opinion of it myself when I see it, and I may hate it for whatever reason, but yeah, I'd like to see it. If you want to introduce a new effect like that, don't immediately obscure and obfuscate it by applying, by making me sit and wear a pair of shitty 3D glasses to watch it. Just let me watch an HFR 2D print first, and then I'll work my way up to an HFR 3D. Thank you very much. And like you say, I don't imagine it'll do much to enhance your drama here and there, but it'd be interesting to see just something action oriented in that format. I guess it would have its advantages. So, like you say, Scott, imagine if the Raid had been HFR. Ooh, oh. Scott, Life of Pi.
Now, we've said many times in the past that it is daft to call any book unfilmable. But there's definitely some books that you read and think, well, this would be quite awkward to film, and this would have been one of them. It is the tale of Piskin Molitor Patel, who is better known as Pi. It starts off covering his early life, and obviously his unique name, and going through things like his first love and also his complicated relationship with religion, that being that he basically follows most of them. This goes along until...
He collects them.
Yeah, he collects them.
Man.
He has a stamp album. And this sort of continues along until what is the obvious pitch of the film, as you'll have seen from the posters. Pi's family decide to move their zoo abroad, at which point, unfortunately, they're caught up in a tragic accident as the cargo ship is caught up in a storm and the ship sinks. This leaves Pi by himself on a lifeboat, at least by himself in terms of human company, as part of the escapees from the zoo hold. There's also a hyena, I think there was briefly a mouse, a zebra, and most importantly of all, a tiger, named Richard Parker after a clerical error. The narrative of the film, at least on the obvious superficial level, follows his struggle to survive in the middle of a desolate ocean and the trials that brings in terms of not only preserving his supplies and water consumption, that kind of thing, but also staying safe from a tiger. Which is not the usual kind of concerns that you would have when you're set adrift at sea, to be fair. So in many ways it's quite interesting on that regard on itself. Pi winds up lashing together a kind of adjunct life raft to the lifeboat and floating out some ways from this dangerous tiger on board the lifeboat.
You've just had a stroke answered one of the questions about this book I own but have not read.
Yes.
How did he get around that whole tiger in the boat thing? So okay, now I can get my head around it. They don't just make friends or something.
Yeah, to be fair, it's fairly ingenious. And
until one night after a drunken poker game, it all went horribly wrong.
it does show some nice things that apparently aren't that unrealistic, according to some article in The Guardian I read a little while, as they train the lion. This is how you would train a lion, although ideally you wouldn't do it at sea.
In a raft.
Now, it will come as no surprise to anyone that this is deeply allegorical rather than realistic in nature.
Scott!
I don't think I'm really spoiling anything here.
Spoiler alert!
I perhaps won't go into the nature of the allegory, but obviously it's a book that could as well be categorised as philosophy rather than fiction. So the film follows suit. I'll perhaps leave you to discover the details of it. But it's probably a film that is worth discovering. I still think you'd probably get more out of the book than you would from the film, but the film does have a lot to recommend it. First off, it looks absolutely beautiful.
Yeah, it certainly does.
Now, this is not uncommon amongst Ang Lee films, but this looks absolutely jaw-droppingly brilliant in places. There's a tremendous sense of visual flair and style to a lot of it that, to be honest, if it had no narrative at all, would probably be worth going to see just as a laser show. Looks beautiful.
Jean-Michel Jarre playing the soundtrack.
I'll go on record, after pillorying 3D before, this is the first time I've actually watched 3D that I thought kind of helps the film for the most part. It's not vital by any stretch of the imagination, but it's really less to do with 3D as a technique in and of itself as it is just the cinematography of the piece.
Yeah, and enhancing the visual aspect of it.
Well, it's the framing, the composition of things, because, I mean, we're all, to various degrees, photographers on this podcast. You will understand the concept of having your eye lead through certain tracking lines to try and create an impression of depth and things like that. And that's what's been done on this film. And it seems to have been done in precious few other films where they seem to think that the fact that they have a 3D camera is enough to give the impression of depth, and it really doesn't. It kind of winds up looking like a parallax scrolling from an old Mega Drive game. Whereas this, they've actually given some thought to how to give a kind of body and breadth to the film. And it's the first time I've actually looked at something and thought, well, the 3D is actually helping create an impression of this being something a bit deeper, a bit more realistic in terms of the kind of depth of field of the thing. And it works quite well as part of that. Now, it is by no means necessary, but it is the first time where I've actually came out with a 3D film thinking I'm actually quite glad I saw that in 3D. I thought it did help rather than was, at best, a minor annoyance.
In the words of Jeremy Irons in Die Hard with a Vengeance, good lord.
Yeah, I don't think I was quite as enamoured with 3Dness as you were, Scott, but it's possibly one of the very few times it's not irritated the crap out of me.
Which counts for something.
Yeah, and I saw it deliberately 3D on your recommendation, and it didn't bother me. And I don't know whether it's just because...
Now you owe him the £2 difference in ticket price.
I don't know whether it was just because it looked so beautiful, the film anyway. I don't know whether the 3D being there had anything to do with it or not. It is visually stunning. The only problem with, as far as the 3D goes, that I had was that it does become gimmicky a couple of times. A couple of sort of things sticking out the film, like a big long stick, which I thought was stupid and gimmicky when I remember Trevor and Simon doing it on the 3D episode of Going Live about 22 years ago. So,
Cutting edge. Trevor and Simon. When was that? When did they do a 3D episode of Going Live?
I think it was around about the time they did the Smell-O-Vision episode as well, which was around about the time I was in hospital with a broken leg. I remember
Jesus.
it quite clearly.
And was it actually 3D? Did they actually ask you to wear 3D specs?
Yeah.
Shit, okay, I missed that. Sorry, I feel like a vital cornerstone of my childhood was missed.
But yeah, other than that, I don't have much to add to what Scott said. It's just a beautiful film. It's really interesting, and I found it a particularly engaging watch.
As what is effectively something more like a fairy story than a narrative, it's just stunning. The performances are really, really great, and that's probably what sets us apart. The performances from Pi, both young and old.
Yeah.
It's been told as, at least in part, as a kind of narration flashback. Both actually all the versions of Pi, even from his early childhood, work really well, and I apologise for slaughtering these names, but the younger Pi is Suraj Sharma, who does really well as the younger Pi, but the adult Pi Patel, Irfan Khan, really ties everything else together, because he just seems like such a genuinely nice person that you would believe what this guy's telling you, regardless of how tall a shaggy dog story it happens to be. If I was picking flaws, it's the same as the book. The story does kind of taper out at the end rather than sort of give you anything particularly stunning until kind of the one sort of sucker punch perhaps at the end if you weren't paying attention to the allegory, which is quite impactful. It maybe could have done with a little bit more punch towards the end of the film. I think it kind of tapers off somewhat towards the end. It's a comparatively weak ending, but only because the rest of the film is so imaginative, visually and narratively.
Yeah, I actually didn't feel that, Scott. Again, I'd read or knew your comments about that going into it, and I was sort of waiting for that, but I didn't feel quite so much that it tapered off actually, and so the last wee bit just made me feel quite warm. I thought, yeah, that's a nice way to end it. I didn't feel it was weaker, really.
I'm less inclined to believe its initial tales of it being something that will make you believe in God. It failed on that score, but on pretty much every other level, Life of Pi succeeded. I thought it was an absolutely stunning film, and I'm very glad I watched it.
Here's an illustration of how much I enjoyed it, because the one thing I didn't like was there was the mention of religion, which generally just gets me incredibly angry, and actually for most of the film it wasn't bothering me at all. I was letting it slide, which, if you know what about me, says a lot.
I almost feel I'm doing a disservice to this film because I'm giving it somewhat short shrift, because I think there's a lot of things you can't really talk about without really damaging the
giving it away.
Yeah. And even not necessarily giving it away, but it just wouldn't be fair to talk about it until someone's seen it. But I can only reiterate that I recommend this most highly. It is not quite my film of the year, but it is in the running for it. This is how much I like the film, so give it a bash as your earliest opportunity.
I for one, I will definitely catch up with it at some point, and I will definitely get round to reading the book 2 years after it came out. If only because Jan Martel was obviously named after Falkirk's greatest nightclub. Now,
Oil Can Harry's?
Yeah. Okay, so Drew, let me throw to you the notion of filling us in on The Impossible.
The plot of The Impossible is fairly straightforward. I imagine nobody's forgotten the huge devastation caused by the tsunami in Southeast Asia, centred around the Indonesian area of Banda Aceh 8 years ago. The Impossible is a story of a Western family on holiday Christmas time in Southeast Asia. They're in a hotel when the tsunami strikes and are separated. And the story is largely of the family trying to find each other, assuming that the worst has probably happened, searching through hospitals, devastated cities, areas that were beach and forest are now swamped, trying to find each other and trying to survive. Somebody not a million miles away from here tweeted, and you may have seen it, that it wastes no opportunity to tug on the heartstrings, which is... It's a fair comment, but then again, it's about complete devastation and people being lost, and
it does it very effectively.
It doesn't feel in any way egregious, does it? It doesn't feel unnecessary. And what more to say? It's a story of a family trying to find each other in really fucked up circumstances. And unlike the last film that featured any footage of that tsunami, Hereafter, the woeful Clint Eastwood effort, the story here is strong, it's emotional, sentimental but not maudlin, and it's just actually quite a heartwarming film. But you actually feel genuinely for the characters, and very strong performances from everybody, particularly the kid playing the eldest of the children, Lucas, who is fantastic.
Yeah, Tom Holland, very strong showing from him.
Yeah, I don't have a lot more to say about that. It's emotional but not maudlin. It's a compelling story. The characters are really interesting, and it's worth a watch. I mean, I don't think it requires an awful lot more in it than that.
I mean, you hit across the one point that I make more than anything else, I think, with this film. The emotion, it is one of the most emotionally powerful films I've seen, certainly this year. It manages to get across the kind of, not only just the struggles that this family has, because, I mean, any family being torn apart by something of this horror is going to have a certain degree of power in and of itself. But
yes,
the only possible criticism that I can think people would have of this film is that obviously it's set in Thailand, which got absolutely, hammered by the tsunami, and of course it's focusing very clearly on one middle-class white family.
Yeah, exactly. I was thinking from the start, that's the one issue I had, was like, well, it's the rich white people, where are all the other Indonesians?
I can easily forgive it that, because you're never going to get across the sheer width and the horror that this thing would have happened to these Thai villages that just were completely wiped out completely.
Yeah.
You can't get that across in a 90-minute film and have any kind of emotional heart to it. Whereas this, I think, just by these characters basically walking through the lands that were crushed and getting help from these people who are obviously in no great shape themselves, told for a far better story and did a far better job of just hinting at the kind of power for events that this had in the country itself.
You're never going to be able to convey the sort of the colossal sense of loss of something like that, and I think obviously
focusing on someone you can relate to makes it a far better.
Not having seen the film after 101 episodes, can you see a pattern developing, listeners? Yeah. I can imagine that. The bigger the scope of the distress and turmoil you're trying to convey, the sort of probably the narrower your focus needs to be to get that message across.
Yeah, that is why it works. It's why, for instance, like charity appeals and stuff tend to focus on like one person.
Yeah.
Humans don't respond. Loads of studies have been done about this as well. Yeah. Humans just don't respond to. You hear thousands of people and they're all suffering, but you show like one child.
Which is why
like an Oxfam appeal or something, they can focus on the one child.
If you want a middle-aged white man to give you £2 a month, don't talk about Thailand. Talk about little Jimmy.
Yeah.
Not a dry eye in the cinema, as far as I can tell. And I did see this in Mexico. There are more emotional people, fiery Latin temperament, but even I was almost getting there at points.
So I'd fit in quite well there then with my bawling sort of dragon.
I'm not much given to crying. It happens on occasion, and certainly my eyes get a little wet towards the end of this.
Yeah.
I'm not much given to crying.
It's not my favourite pastime. However,
I'm quite the opposite.
No, I did feel myself welling a little towards the end of this. It's focused on the one family that makes it, because they sort of represent the things that have happened to lots of people.
Yeah, again, this gets my highest recommendation. It points towards the start of it where it shows Maria trying to, who's the mother, Naomi Watts' character, trying to get back to civilization. It does come across some point as a hybrid of like 127 hours and Touching the Void. The effects work at the start of this film, which I assume must be all where most of the $30 million, I think, dollar budget went, barring, actors' fees. The moments where the tsunami hits and the kind of aftermath of that and the devastation that wreaks when you see, there's not an awful lot of that shown in the film. It's maybe, 5-10 minutes towards the start. But for my money, that is actually the most effective and the best bit of effects work that I have seen this year. That tsunami hitting and washing away had more impact than anything that I've seen in The Avengers or any other sort of nonsense.
Don't try and say it was more impactful than Transformers. The Dark of the Moon.
It was at least 0.2 times more effective than that. I am actually quite disturbed that this didn't get even a look in for any kind of effects work, like awards. It doesn't seem to have been done that. And I thought some of the stuff, certainly at least not in the Oscars, which is again one of the usual suspects of the Avengers or whoever's throwing the most money at it, but some of this work at the front is the most effective and emotionally touching use of effects work that I've seen.
There's clearly some CGI stuff there, but some of it's what I figured was sort of matte painting for the wide bits, and they were quite clearly in the water, in real water at some points.
Yeah, I understand they used a lot of water tank stuff.
Yeah, reading this on this. Bearing in mind this is Wikipedia, so we know how likely that is to be completely accurate. But the tsunami was recreated with a mixture of digital effects and real water surges using miniatures that were destroyed by a huge wave created in a water tank in Spain. The director was committed to working with real water rather than a computer-generated wave, which meant that Naomi Watts and Tom Holland spent 5 weeks in a massive water tank.
Yeah,
I feel sorry for them, but I mean that is why the effects works so well.
Absolutely.
Well, and it's a facility of budget as well. I was listening to an interview with I can't remember if it was the director or one of the technical guys in another podcast a couple of weeks ago. They were talking about this, and they said, as a function of the budget, we just couldn't afford to do there's so much water in this film that we can't afford to do it realistically in CG on the budget we had. But from what I understand,
it's cheaper
if it's cheaper
water
and more realistic to use actual water, then it seems that they've done a good job.
No, for a film that I think that was right. There's a $30 million figure there. This film looks brilliant for that amount of money.
$45 million actually.
45. Even then, it is.
Even you can't. That's when you said that number and you've seen the number that's on Wikipedia. That's quite impressive to do something. It's the scale of it.
Yeah, every dollar of that is on the screen. It's actually irrelevant to the emotional struggle of the characters, to be honest with you, but it does help drive it home in a tremendous way, and it's another highest recommendation for this.
Because it just makes you think of the devastation. I mean, same after the Japanese tsunami a couple of years ago too. You see the aerial shots of the devastation and like the boats 100 miles inland and stuff.
Yeah.
And you just let it go.
Yeah.
Fuck.
Boats on top of multi-story car parks and stuff like that. Yeah.
It reminds you are a very small, easily thrown about speck on the face of this planet.
Yeah.
And
although it's even some of the perhaps subtler stuff that's even more compelling too. Naomi Watts gets flung underwater, and you sort of wince with the
oh god, yeah,
completely believable force of a branch penetrating her side.
Oof. Yeah,
and that's a fairly subtle effect. It's not the big scale thing, but that really sells it. Like, oh Jesus, no wonder she's struggling to walk through all this and climb a tree.
Now I don't know about you, but did you have an entire screening full of people going? Oh Christ! When that happens,
do you remember when we went to see Touching the Void? At the point at which he stepped through that sort of snow shelf and landed and
Touching the Void,
jarred his leg, and it explained how that his femur split and stuff like that.
There's points where it's very much that, and yeah.
Oh shit. Okay, gonna have to see this then. My water valves need a good clean out. It's been a while since I've had a good ball at a film in the cinema, so
I think this would do it. If How to Train Your Dragon can, then this will probably get us flowing.
Yeah, silly. Even if it doesn't during it, wait till the end. I guarantee the water will be flowing, Craig.
Well, there's I can't help but think, because I still can't. I know it's. I mean, what's Ewan McGregor's performance like in this? Because I was listening to something the other day where they played a clip from the film, and it must be from fairly early on, just after the tsunami, where Ewan McGregor is trying to talk to someone on the phone and explain what's happened.
Oh Christ! No.
That's quite far in, actually.
He sounds real. Is it? He sounds really distressed.
It's real.
And on one hand, I'm thinking, actually, it seems like he's doing a good job. But at the same time, all I could think was, I'm a Jedi.
No,
so I was listening to him trying to sound like he was crying, and I was walking around Sainsbury's with my cans on, just wetting myself laughing, trying to choose something for my lunch.
He's probably the weakest there, because he's not the most fantastic actor, but he's pretty damn good in this. And afterwards, it's maybe just his crying, he's sobbing after that bit sounds a bit like he's laughing actually, but the bit when he's on the phone, that's actually quite powerful.
I feel bad for laughing in Sainsbury's now. Alright, so there we go. So of those three, which one, if you had to, someone put a gun to your head, which one would you recommend?
Oh, I would say, why don't you just go see Life of Pi and the Impossible?
I can.
And then I'd ask why you put a gun to my head.
Get shot in the head then.
Well, no, I wouldn't. Kick him in the nuts and steal his gun, because it's probably a replica.
Scott?
I concur. I would still contend that Life of Pi and The Impossible they're much stronger films. I like The Hobbit, but I wouldn't perhaps recommend people run out and see it, but I still enjoyed The Hobbit. But
yeah, I wouldn't
Peter
say
Jackson,
I wouldn't avoid people.
yourself.
I wouldn't recommend people avoided The Hobbit, but yeah, I wouldn't recommend it. But I would very much recommend not either, but both of the other two.
Well, what we're saying is there's better stuff to spend your money on.
Although I would say, for once,
the New Line's cash grab attempt.
It is perhaps worth seeing all of them, given the number of weeks where we've seen lots of things where we've recommended none of them. So this is a pleasant change.
Yeah, and can I just point out that on a day when I watched The Hobbit, Life of Pi, and The Impossible all in one day in the cinema, the fact that I didn't find any of them completely boring and loved two of them probably says quite a lot. That, by the end of Life of Pi, I wasn't really fed up of films or anything.
Yeah, good on you. Okay, so there we go. That concludes our roundup of the stuff doing the rounds right now in the cinema. So recently we decided that there are enough films that we miss in a year, believe it or not, that it's probably worthwhile having a recap each podcast where we go back and check out some of the stuff we didn't see first time around but which is now available on catch-up services, whether that's retail or on demand. And for the first of those, we will have a brief discussion about the Toby Jones starring Berberian Sound Studio. So Berberian Sound Studio is a very low-budget is it Anglo-Italian and I want to say either French and German production, Scott?
Well, it's from Studio Yorkshire, or the Yorkshire Film Board, isn't it? So.
Yorkshire Film Board have an input in it. So, and it stars one of Britain's most highly prized character actors, Toby Jones, as a mild-mannered sound engineer more used to working on nature documentaries, who is recruited by a film studio in Italy to go and work as sound engineer on a giallo horror film, something which he is most definitely not au fait with. It sounds like such a bizarre setup, and in many ways it is. During the course of his sound engineering duties, the nature of the film gets somewhat under our Toby's skin, and all manner of odd manifestations of character take hold. Now, this film, first of all, let me say, this film I came to not because I was initially grabbed by the concept, but because it has made a lot of people whose opinions carry some weight in my neck of the woods. It's made a lot of their end of year sort of top 10 lists. So I thought, okay, Toby Jones rarely puts a foot wrong. I'm going to have to check this out. And I want to say I can't make up my mind about it because I really feel like I want to go back and watch it a second time. But if I'm being honest, on first impressions, I'm not entirely sure why it's made end of year lists.
Exactly.
Toby Jones, as always, his performance, I have no qualm with whatsoever. Does a bang up job. As a film, I'm not convinced at all.
Yeah, I mean, I watched this almost coincidentally for the same reasons. A few people, guys, sorry, in all respect, guys like Andrew Collins, have said this is maybe if not my top film of the year, it's on the list. It's in the bubbling under categories at least. So I thought let's give it a bash. I mean, it's obviously at a disadvantage from the outset, being something of a homage to giallo flicks, and of course, giallo is Italian for shit film.
Yeah,
and it did seem like at least half an hour of this film is based around very slowly zooming in on a 60s or 70s era audio gauge or dial.
That's not a bad summation, actually.
But I don't know. I can see, at least in part, where these guys are coming from when they're saying that they really enjoyed it, because despite this overwhelming cacophony of things not happening, there's something just quite compelling about watching Toby Jones's character just slide into kind of boredom and isolation and paranoia, and then eventually sort of into more...
He develops this fascination over reclaiming his flight expenses that sort of parallels Norman Bateman's frustration with having to take back videotapes. Norman Bateman? Patrick Bateman even, sorry.
Norman Bates, Patrick Bates.
You just confused your psychos there, I think.
Patrick
I was going to say I've created an amalgam of psychos. One psycho is not good enough for me.
When this film works, it works because Toby Jones is terrific rather than the script is terrific. It is something that is kind of completely predicated on Toby Jones's talent, and it's for that it does quite well, but it just suffers from not having anything resembling a conclusion. It manages for about, what's that, maybe an hour, at least 50 minutes or so, building up a pretty reasonable feeling of foreboding. And just when you think it's about to cash that into something, it just goes off the rails and falls apart.
Yeah, you've hit the nail on the head with the ending, Scott, and the film almost manages to exist on its own terms throughout, with the expectation of some kind of payoff. Constantly while watching it, I'm thinking, how is this going to end? And when it does eventually end, it does so in this wantonly oblique fashion, which the only thought I think I tweeted about this, I might have tweeted on the one-liner account actually. Yes. The only parallel I could draw was that it has a desperate desire to be David Lynch, very Lynchian in its finale, but without the justification in the build-up. I'm not going to sit here and pretend that I can qualify why David Lynch's films work or why Mulholland Drive is in my sort of top 10 films of all time. It exists on some sort of parallel plane that we get to visit when we go to the cinema to see a David Lynch film, but other than that, it doesn't exist in the real world. Whatever magic it is he works can't be recreated simply by, okay, I'm not going to spoil it, so I'm not going to explain what happens at the end, but there is no justification why this sort of random ending to me has, in my opinion, been tacked on. It's no justification of anything. It casts asunder the fantastic work that Toby Jones has done throughout the running time of the film. I'm struggling to find any merit in it. I really have to go back and watch it again, because the first hour and 20 minutes are entirely acceptable, and like you say, build some kind of atmosphere, some kind of sense of anticipation. There's a very definite arc in terms of the tone of the film and how it's progressing, and there's quite satisfying, gradual, you can almost feel the atmosphere of the film clawing at Toby Jones's character and sort of gradually
infecting him,
reducing this guy's mind to mush. Yeah, I just wasn't expecting the payoff that I got, and to suddenly cast this kind of ending at the film. David Lynch gets away with it because his whole film is some sort of surreal ending. I just want to say it doesn't work. I feel like Peter Strickland has completely misjudged it, and I don't know, maybe on a second view and I'll feel entirely different about it. This opinion does come with the proviso that at the point my back pain had manifested itself in such a way that I was on tramadol at the time that I watched this film. So mileage may definitely vary, but I can't help but feel that when I inevitably watch it again, I'm probably going to feel the same about it, and it was a fantastically missed opportunity. Odd, really odd. I genuinely don't understand why it's made people's end of year list, because even the greatest performance on earth does not make a film without any well, it's perhaps a bit harsh to say any other merit, because obviously it has merits, but just not enough of them for it to be held in that kind of esteem in my book.
Whoa, but those tramadol nights. Well. For what it's worth, I completely agree with you. So I think when you're off the meds, you'll probably have the same opinion.
Yeah.
I can't back this up with logic, but David Lynch's plot, they're not even twists, they're breaks.
Yeah.
But when he pulls something off...
David Lynch's films follow a dream logic from start to finish.
But what... I mean, I don't...
This follows a very definite kind of arc, for the most part, sort of fairly grounded all the way through, and then throws in dream logic in the last reel, and it jars.
That
doesn't work.
I mean, I wouldn't even put logic anywhere near David Lynch's films, but for some reason, I can't back this up with paperwork, but they make sense on an emotional level to me. It's like I can't quite work out why these things are happening.
I can't even pretend that's the case with every David Lynch film, though. For me, it literally is Mulholland Drive, and I'm not a great fan of any other David Lynch film.
I think the difference is that there's at least some way I can make some kind of sense of what happens in Lynch's films, even if I'm kind of almost lying to myself. Whereas when this film pulls off its what the fuck moment, you just kind of dismiss it with a wave of the hand and kind of forget about it, and then just ignore the last remaining 20 minutes or so. And that's, I think, what annoys me about it more than anything else, because there's 2/3 of something really great here. And for what is, he's not far from a first-time director and writer, Peter Strickland. I think he's done one feature before this, maybe. And for something that's pulled off on, Cattle and Varga, 2009, and a couple of short films, clearly, the guy does not have the most experience in the world, and I think for 2/3 of the way, he's pulled off something that is really quite impressive. And the last third just can't live up to it, which is a real shame. And even then, it's not exactly bad. It's just not a patch on what preceded it. So
say it's too oblique.
For my mind, it's going to suffer naturally, because anything that even hints at a reference to Giallo films is going to remind me of Dario Argento's hilarious Giallo from 2009, which was the single stupidest film of 2009. Barbarian sounds pseudo itself as if I'd stopped watching it 2/3 of the way through, I could probably see why people were putting this on year-end lists, thinking, well, this is an exciting, relatively new talent who's done a tremendous thing on a minuscule budget. But no, the ending of it kind of ruined it for me. It just doesn't match up to the rest of the film, and no matter how good Toby Jones is, and Toby Jones is terrific in this film, it's just not worth the investment of 90 minutes of your time for it. I'm very interested to see what Peter Strickland goes on and does next. I think he's definitely got a talented future. This one, I think, will be perhaps minor Strickland in the grand scheme of things, hopefully. Hopefully he goes on to do something really spectacular.
With any luck, this will be the insomnia to his Inception.
Yes. It's almost worth a look, but only for the first hour.
Yeah, definitely.
Stream it for the first hour, then give it
It's
a break.
almost worth a look because the character's called Gilderoy. And I thought I'd stumbled into King Arthur. We will be back in a couple of weeks with yet another podcast. How predictable we've become. But until then, I was Craig Eastman. Scott Morris was Scott Morris.
It was indeed. Goodbye.
Drew Tavendale was, undoubtedly, unequivocally, Drew Tavendale.
That I was. Fare thee well.
Fare all of thee well. Remember, fucking rate us on iTunes. Bye! Oh, Master Frodo, they've downloaded my barley!